She stopped texting first. No explanation, no fight, no goodbye. One day she was everywhere in your life. Good morning texts, voice notes about her day, plans for the weekend. And then, nothing. You waited. You told yourself she was busy. Then you did what almost everyone does. You reached out. Then again. Then a third time. A little softer. A little more careful. Trying not to sound needy while sounding exactly that. And somewhere in that waiting, something strange happened. The less she responded, the more you needed her to. What if the problem was never her silence? What if it was your reaction to it? Here's the surprising truth Stoic philosophers understood 2,000 years before modern psychology caught up. The moment you need someone's approval to feel okay, you hand them power over you. Not romantic power, not attraction, control. And people can feel that shift even when they can't name it. But before we go further, take a second to subscribe. YouTube rarely shows the same video twice, and if this helps you see relationships differently, we may never cross paths again. Now let's uncover why detachment isn't coldness. It's the most respected trait in human psychology. Marcus Aurelius wrote something that sounds almost too simple. He said we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Most heartbreak isn't caused by rejection itself. It's caused by the story we tell ourselves while waiting for a reply. That text bubble that appears, then disappears. That read notification with no response. Your mind fills the silence with worst-case scenarios, and the anxiety becomes unbearable. But here's what almost nobody realizes. That anxiety is visible, not literally, but behaviorally. People sense desperation the same way animals sense fear. It changes your tone. Your texts get longer. Your jokes get less playful. Your presence starts asking for reassurance instead of offering value. And psychology has a name for what happens next. Researcher Arthur Aaron studied what actually creates closeness between two people. It wasn't grand gestures. It wasn't chasing. It was mutual vulnerability shared at an equal pace. Equal. Not one person performing and the other person evaluating. The moment you detach from needing a response, something shifts. You stop performing, you start existing. Then something unexpected happens. People are drawn towards stability the way they're repelled by desperation. Not because stability is exciting, because it's rare. Think about the last time someone texted you constantly, needing validation every few hours. It didn't feel flattering for long. It felt heavy. Now think about someone who was warm, present, but never anxious about your response time. That person felt different, safer, more attractive, even if you couldn't explain why. This is where most people make the biggest mistake. They confuse detachment with disappearing, with playing games, with pretending not to care. That's not Stoicism. That's manipulation, wearing Stoicism's clothes. Real detachment isn't about her. It's about you. Epictetus, one of the most practical Stoics, said something that changes everything once you actually apply it to modern dating. He said some things are within our control and some things are not. Peace comes from knowing the difference. You cannot control whether she replies in 5 minutes or 5 hours. You cannot control whether she's scrolling TikTok instead of texting you back. You cannot control her attachment style, her ex, her fear of getting hurt again, her bad day. But you can control this. Whether your worth depends on her behavior. And that single shift is the difference between chasing and attracting. Here's where attraction becomes counterintuitive. Helen Fisher's research on the brain in love found something fascinating. Uncertainty doesn't kill attraction. In small doses, it actually intensifies it. Dopamine, the chemical tied to craving and reward, spikes not when we get something, but when we're not sure if we'll get it. That's why constant availability can feel boring and mystery can feel magnetic. But here's the trap. Too much uncertainty, created on purpose, feels like manipulation, and people eventually see through it. Detachment isn't about creating uncertainty for her. It's about removing your own uncertainty about yourself. Now the story becomes much bigger. Esther Perel, one of the most respected voices in modern relationship psychology, said desire needs space to breathe, not distance from love, distance from anxiety. She's talked about how too much emotional merging, too much need, actually suffocates attraction rather than deepening it. When you're detached, not cold, not indifferent, but emotionally self-sufficient, you give the relationship room to breathe. And ironically, that room is what makes people lean in. Think about that. Here's what makes this bigger than just one relationship. This isn't really about a woman. It's about self-worth. Somewhere along the way, many people learned that love means proving yourself, performing, chasing, explaining, fixing every silence with more effort. But psychology discovered something fascinating about attachment styles. People with an anxious attachment style often equate love with intensity. Any silence feels like abandonment. Any distance feels like danger. People with a secure attachment style experience the same silence completely differently. They don't spiral. They trust that connection isn't destroyed by a few unanswered hours. The goal isn't to become cold or unfeeling. The goal is to become secure enough that her response, or lack of one, doesn't define your value. That wasn't rejection, it was a mirror. John Gottman, after decades studying couples, found that relationships don't fail because of conflict. They fail because of contempt, defensiveness, and emotional withdrawal that builds silently over time. Neediness accelerates all three. It creates pressure, and pressure, applied to another human being, almost always pushes them away. Sue Johnson, who developed emotionally focused therapy, talks about something called protest behavior. When someone feels emotionally disconnected, they either pursue harder or withdraw completely. Both come from the same fear, losing connection. Detachment, done right, interrupts that cycle. It says, I want this, but I don't need this to survive. And that wasn't weakness. That was psychology. Now think about modern dating specifically. Dating apps, situationships, left on red, mixed signals, ghosting. We live in a culture of infinite options and instant communication, which means attention has become the ultimate currency. When you chase, you're spending your currency freely without knowing if it's valued. When you detach, you're not withholding out of spite. You're simply not overspending emotional energy on uncertainty. Daniel Kahneman's research on loss aversion applies here more than people realize. Humans feel losses roughly twice as intensely as equivalent gains. When you're always available, always reassuring, always chasing, there's nothing to lose. But when you show up as a complete person, with a life, standards, and self-respect, the potential loss of that becomes real. And loss, psychologically, creates value. But here's where most people go wrong trying to apply this. They think detachment means pulling away from her. It actually means returning to yourself. Your friendships you neglected while obsessing over her replies. Your goals you paused while refreshing your phone. Your identity that quietly disappeared while you tried to become whoever she wanted. Brené Brown's research on vulnerability makes something clear that people often misunderstand. Vulnerability isn't weakness, but it also isn't self-abandonment. True vulnerability requires a stable self to be vulnerable from. Detachment builds that stable self first. So here's the bigger picture. That silence after your last message wasn't proof you weren't enough. It was an invitation to stop outsourcing your peace to someone else's phone screen. A woman doesn't respect detachment because it makes you unavailable. She respects it because it means you can't be lost. You already have yourself. Remember that moment at the beginning? The waiting, the reread messages, the spiraling thoughts? That wasn't about her at all. It was about the relationship you have with yourself in her absence. Detachment, real detachment, doesn't mean stop caring. It means stop bleeding your identity into someone else's response time. Because the moment you don't need her reply to feel whole, you become the kind of person worth replying to. That's where everything changes. And most people never notice it happening until they finally stop chasing. And somehow, everything starts moving toward them instead. If this helped you understand relationships a little better, subscribe and join us. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And until next time, keep learning what really drives human connection.